Thank you very much, Raya and Mordechai, for hosting this class. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are watching our class. Welcome to the weekly Tuesday evening class in Chassidut. We are in the middle of the course called Seriously Happy, and today we're going to start chapter 30, one of the best chapters, one of my most beloved chapters of the Tanya. I have 53 most beloved chapters, and there are 53. I'm just kidding around, but I really like this parak, this chapter, and we will start with an interesting story that took place. There was once a public debate between a Reform rabbi and Velvel Green, Professor Velvel Green, who was a professor in NASA. He lived in Minnesota, and in the beginning he didn't have much of any connection to Judaism, but through the Rebbe's shliach, Rabbi Moshe Feller, may he live long and happy years, an amazing individual. He made contact with Professor Velvel Green, and he made the connection with the Rebbe, and Professor Green came to see the Rebbe, and they had a lot of correspondences. You can do a search after the class, not during the class. Professor Velvel Green, of blessed memory, he lived here in Israel for many years. He worked in the University of Rechavia. He wrote some books on science and Torah. Really an amazing individual. His son today, Rabbi David Green, is a shliach, I believe somewhere in Minnesota, Minneapolis, somewhere around there. And so Professor Green was having a public debate with a Reform rabbi. And at one point, the Reform rabbi turns to Professor Green and says, "Professor, who are you to tell me how we're supposed to practice Judaism? Just look at yourself. You're not even wearing a kippah. You don't seem to be practicing Judaism. So how is it that you are lecturing me about against my perspective on Judaism?" At the time, Professor Green had been just in the beginning of his coming closer to Yiddishkeit. And the reason why he agreed to participate in this debate, even though he didn't even have a kippah on, he wasn't even at that level yet. But the Rebbe told him that even though you're at the beginning, you need to be part of lecturing about Yiddishkeit, telling people, encouraging people, uplifting people about Judaism. And so even in this state, Professor Green was having this debate, defending the Torah Orthodox perspective, which is the real perspective of Judaism, versus a Reform rabbi. So at this point, the hall was silent. Everyone was waiting to hear what Professor Green is going to answer. And he said as follows. You see, if you have a ladder, and the ladder has many rungs, you have one person on the top rung and one person on the bottom rung. Who is higher and who is lower? Most people will say the one that's higher is higher, and the one that's on the bottom rung is lower. But you can look at it from another perspective. If you look at it from in which direction each one of them are going, you might have a different answer. If the top one is going down and the bottom one is going in the up direction, then in a sense, the one on the bottom rung is even higher than the one on the top rung. And that's the message that Professor Green was trying to convey to the Reform rabbi. Who is going to be the one to decide who is higher or who is lower? He was eventually going to reach the level of observance, complete observance in Torah Mitzvah. As he reached, he was a full-fledged Torah observant Jew, a Chabad Chassid. But at that time, he was just in the beginning. She said, even though now I might be in the bottom rung, you cannot judge me. And you cannot decide for me that I am not the one to lecture you. I am presenting the Torah perspective, and please God, I am inching towards that goal. Chapter 30, Perek Lamed in the Tanya, which is part of this subject of when we talk about seriously happy, how a person can bring themselves to real simcha, discusses this issue about the ladder. And in life, not only in Torah life, but in life in general, we have a number of ladders. We have a spiritual ladder. And the more a person is Torah observant, they are naturally on a higher rung in the ladder. On the highest rung, you'll have someone who is totally observant in all of the 613 mitzvot. In the middle, you'll have someone that's a Beinoni, someone that's in the middle. And on the lowest rung, you'll have a person that's a Rasha, a person that does not observe the mitzvot, and there are many levels in the middle. Then you have a ladder of wisdom. The wiser a person is, with a higher IQ and higher marks and better certificates, that means that the person in the ladder of wisdom is higher. Then you have the stance in which a person stands. You have a person in the hierarchy that has a higher level, that is responsible in whatever profession the person is over a larger amount of people, has a larger effect. So that person in their ma'amad, in their stance, is on a higher level than people that are, let's say, on the other extreme of the spectrum, someone who is just into their private life, minds their own business, doesn't really have any inspiration, any effect per se over others. Then you have in the materialistic world. The more a person has materialism, the more the person has wealth, the more the person has belongings, that person is higher on the ladder, on that ladder, than someone who is perhaps unfortunately can barely make the end of the month. So please write into the comments or into the chat, where do you think you find yourself on the ladder? Whether on the spiritual ladder, on the materialistic ladder, where do you see yourself? Because in order for a person to be able to grow, a big factor is, how does a person see themselves? If a person sees themselves as the end-all, be-all, top of everything, no room to grow, then that itself, as we're going to see soon, is not a very good sign. And so we want to clarify in this lesson, Bezrat Hashem, how do we view ourselves and how do we view our fellow Jew? We are not allowed to be judgmental, which is a very fundamental concept in Judaism and of course in Chabad. The secret to how we treat others, especially the way shluchim of the Rebbe and Hasidim of the Rebbe treat others, mirrors the Rebbe's vision of how he views other people and other Jews. And so therefore, that's the trick, that's the key to know how we are supposed to hopefully grow in Yiddishkeit, each and every one of us in our own in our own scenario. So first we have to check into what is the whole idea of humility and feeling like nothing, feel like selfless. What is the Torah perspective on how to view oneself as being nothingness? It's like the joke of the guy that got the first aliyah that a Yisrael, a regular Yisrael, not Cohen, not Levi, but a regular Yisrael could have, which is Shlishi. So he once told someone that he is such a big anav. He says, I'm so humble that if people would really know how humble I am, they would give me the first aliyah. They wouldn't give me the third aliyah to make me wait. Even though it's usually reserved for the Kohen, but because I'm so humble, they would for sure give me the first aliyah, which is the greatest honor. So being humble is a perspective. It's hard to give a class when you can't hear how people laugh at your joke. That's part of it's part of the scenery of the class. But I trust all of you that you're laughing so loud that you should burst through the Facebook Live and the Zoom. And so when it comes to being humble, there are a few important guidelines and keys to how we can be humble. And part of that is to see how do we view ourselves and how do we view others. Do we shun them down? Do we push them down? Do we, God forbid, treat them as if they were garbage because we are the most successful in our field? Or do we magnify others? And that's going to define in a great way, the way we treat others defines what is our love. So in the Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of Our Fathers, it says a statement, I believe more than once, and it says as follows. Hevei shval ruach b'fnei kol adam. One should be humble, a humble spirit, in front of every person. In other words, someone that stands on the top rung of the ladder. And it could be that you stand on the top rung of the ladder. There's nothing wrong with standing on the top rung of the ladder. Whether spiritually speaking, being a tzaddik and observing all the mitzvot, or materially speaking, that a person that has been successful, Baruch Hashem, in their business, it's okay. It's fine. But if a person feels themselves boastful over someone who was on the bottom rung of the ladder, that's where the problem is. It's okay. You see, humility does not deny the truth. Humility acknowledges that Hashem made certain people in a certain status, and Hashem made certain scenarios in the world, and that's the fact. We're not going to change that fact. But one thing we could say. What we could say is that one may be at the top of the ladder or close to there, but one should never underestimate the person who's standing beneath them on one of the lower rungs of the ladder. And it's not a contradiction. Just because you might find yourself on some level, on some scale, on a higher rung than someone else, you can still feel humble with regards to that person. What's the trick? The trick is to realize that which puts you on a higher rung you cannot take the credit for it. At least 100%, maybe 50%, maybe 10%, maybe 1% or less. So maybe you put in a little bit of an effort, or you did something to put you up on that rung. But ultimately, it's Hashem himself who chooses, who gives a person the ability to exercise their talents and to reach that level. So when Hashem gives us brains, Bezrat Hashem, a good heart, an ability to make a lot of money and to be successful, it's the credit goes to Hashem. He's the one that gets the credit. So if Hashem gave you and I a certain talent, Baruch Hashem, and someone else may not have that talent, you simply say, either to the person verbally or conceptually, if Hashem would have given my talents to you, you may have surpassed my success by miles. And so, the realization that someone standing beneath us on the ladder can be greater, can be taller, can be more successful than us, puts us in a status of true humility. True humility in spirituality. The story goes that the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, the author of the Tanya, was once in a home of a Torah scholar, which was from the Misnagdim. They were those that opposed the ways of Chassidut, the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mizrich, the Alter Rebbe, and so on. And when the Alter Rebbe was in his house, the Alter Rebbe noticed a sefer of the Noam Elimelech, which was written by one of the greatest students of the Maggid of Mizrich, a colleague of the Alter Rebbe, and it was on the floor in a very embarrassing way. It seemed to be purposely on the floor. And the Alter Rebbe was very upset, and he shared his frustration with this Misnagid. And so the Misnagid said to the Alter Rebbe, why are you sticking up for the author of this book? What is so special about him? So the Alter Rebbe said to him, I will tell you what's so special. If you were to put him himself, the author of the book, under the bench, under the seat, like you did to his book, he would not have mind. He would not mind. So, this in a sense teaches us the greatness of Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk. He was a great tzaddik, and he wrote this amazing sefer of Noam Elimelech. But the Alter Rebbe made sure that there is no way in the world to embarrass and to shame such a great tzaddik and to put his sefer on the floor, but to pick it up and to treat it with the right respect. So, the question is, how can someone really bring themselves to feel humble towards someone else who may be on a lower rung? Let's just take a simple example of the spiritual ladder. Someone that achieved and earned a higher level of Torah observance, and they're supposed to look at someone on the lowest level, which perhaps, unfortunately, may do things quite intentionally against Torah, against Hashem, God forbid, and we're expecting someone of such a high caliber to be humble in reference to the individual who is so low. Is that right? How could you do that? So here's the key, which we're going to soon see in the text of the Alter Rebbe, of the Tanya. And in the meantime, you can open up your Tanya to chapter 30. You know, in a later section in the Tanya, called Igeret HaKodesh, the holy letters of the Alter Rebbe. There are about 32 letters that are printed. It's almost the last part of the Tanya. In the second letter, this is a letter that was written to his Chassidim. The Alter Rebbe wrote soon after he was released from prison in Petersburg. And the Alter Rebbe, amongst other things, wrote how to treat the Misnagdim who, because of them, largely, the Alter Rebbe ended up in prison. And he said, our derech, our way, is not to bash, not to respond, but to do the truth for the truth. Like the Rambam says, I'm adding the Rambam. A person does the truth because that's the truth. Regardless if someone else understands it or likes it, but you do the truth for because it's true. And the Alter Rebbe quoted what it says in the pasuk, in the verse, Titen emet liYaakov. Give truth to Jacob, to Yaakov. Truth is not simple at all. To be true, to be real, the real thing is a big challenge. And the Tzemach Tzedek, the Alter Rebbe's grandson, later said that if the Alter Rebbe would have not have written these three words, Midat Emet liYaakov, the attribute of truth for Yaakov, for Jacob, he could have had another 50,000 Chassidim. In those days, back then, that's an astronomical amount of Chassidim followers. But the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, for him, it was important to put a focus on emet, on truth. And if we go with the truth, we know we're going in the right direction. Not to put anybody else down, but there are many people who will, in order to achieve something inspirational, quote unquote, so to speak, they'll do things that are not bad, they're good, but they're not necessarily the truth. And so the Alter Rebbe said, my way is truth. If you want to be connected with me, you want to be my follower, you need to have emet. And this is a very important point that the Alter Rebbe mentions in the Tanya. So first we're going to read a few lines, and then I'm going to try to go into the details of the words to try to explain some interesting points. So right now we're in the beginning of Perek Lamed, chapter 30. Od zot yasim el libo. Moreover, a person should take to heart. Lekayim ma'amar rabbeinu zal, to fulfill the statement of our sages, v'havei shefal ruach b'fnei kol ha'adam, that one should be humble and a low spirit in front of anyone. You can pay attention that if you look in the text, in the original text of the Pirkei Avot, of the ethics of our fathers, it says, B'fnei kol adam, in front of every person. Over here it says, B'fnei kol ha'adam. He adds the hey. Soon we'll see why. Then the Alter Rebbe says, V'havei, you should be. So we're not playing any games. Be'emet la'amito, with the truth, the ultimate truth. That's a big statement. B'fnei kol ha'adam, mamash, literally. Afilu b'fnei kal shebekalim. Even in front of the most light-headed person. Each and every one of us needs to be sincerely humble. So, what the Alter Rebbe is hinting to is as follows. There are some people that try to be humble, but it's fake humility. It's not real. You send one message to one person, but deep in your heart, you feel that it's opposite. You can make a person feel good, but deep in your heart, you feel that really I'm better than them. Then you have emet. Then you have truth. What is truth? Where the way you view someone else is what you truly believe deep down in your heart. Chassidus puts a great emphasis on pnimiyut, on the innermost service of Hashem. Very often, because we're human beings, we naturally tend to act in a chitzoniyut way, in an external way. What are people going to think of me? But is that something that a person truly believes and understands deep down? Not so sure. So the Alter Rebbe over here in chapter 30 expects of us to be true. When a person is true, then they can be deeply happy. When a person puts on a smile like the stewards or the stewardesses on the airplane, would you like some Coke? They make the Coke. Here is the Coke. And they continue doing what they're doing. It's totally like on Purim, where you draw a smile, but it's not a real smile. But when a person is true, when a person is real deep down, then that brings an inner simcha, an inner happiness. And it's so important to train ourselves to be real. And if it's hard, if it's difficult, we need to work on ourselves, and it's perfectly fine. We are human beings. Hashem knows that we're human beings. But we do have to be in the process of working on ourselves. Interestingly enough, I pointed out while we were learning the text of the Tanya, it said, "V'hevei shfal ruach b'fnei kol ha'adam," with a hey. One should be humble in front of every person. So in the original text, it says Adam without the hey beforehand. But in the text of the Tanya, it says Ha'adam. So the Rebbe points out in one of his talks that Adam refers to a Jew. Ha'adam, the person, refers to a Gentile. In other words, the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing that it's not enough to be humble in front of every Jew, but one needs to be humble in front of every person, even Gentile. In other words, for a person to feel humble, a person should realize that even someone who is not Jewish, someone that's on a spiritual level much lower than them, there's always something to learn from everyone. The person has something to contribute to the world. The proof is the person is here. They tell a story that there was a rabbi and the priest, and the priest always showed as if he was very, very humble. So the rabbi knew that this guy wasn't truly humble, and so he went to him and he said, "I heard you are so humble." And the priest was so happy to hear this, that someone actually recognized his humility. So the rabbi said, "I have a question for you. It says in the Bible, it says in the Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble person of all people. But how could that be true? You are more humble than Moshe, than Moses." So just from the question itself, the priest's eyes lit up. He never received such a compliment like the rabbi just gave him. just from the question itself. So he responded to the rabbi, "You have an excellent question. I have the same question as you." So the rabbi said, "Aha, if you have this question, then I already have my answer." Part and parcel of being humble, the Alter Rebbe brings out to us, is the fact that we need to be true with ourselves. And when we are true and we realize hamakiret mekomo, you realize one's place, and you realize the other person's place, and it's possible that the other person, even being on a lower level, can really be higher than me myself. So let's continue with the next few lines of the Tanya. V'hainu al pi ma'amar rabbeinu zal, as it's explained in what our sages have told us. Al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia l'mkomo. Do not judge your friend until you reach their place. Ki mekomo gorem lo lachto, because potentially the person's place causes him to sin. Since he might be in the shuk, in the marketplace, the entire time. And it could be that he sits hours where the wagons, the wagons today would be like where the taxis and where where people congregate and they come and they go, and the buses. And his eyes see all kinds of cravings. The eye sees, and the heart lusts, desires. That his heart burns with a fire, with a fiery burning. As it says in Hosea, Prophet Hosea, that he burns like a flame fire. Maybe that's why that person is on such a low level, because the entire day the person is involved with all kinds of materialistic matters, and sometimes quite the opposite of holiness. On the other hand, someone that goes to the marketplace just a little, and most of the day he sits in his home. And even if he goes the entire day in the shuk, perhaps he's not so hot-blooded. He's more of a cool person, calm and collected. Maybe naturally he's more of a colder individual. The inclination is not the same in every person. There are some people have this kind of inclination, some people have another kind of inclination. So I'd like to just finish off with a story that one time, the Rebbe's, they accept people for a private audience. And one time the second Rebbe, Rabbi Goldberg, the son of the Alter Rebbe, was receiving people into his office for yichidut, for a private audience. And he stopped, one time he stopped in the middle of the yichidut. In other words, between people, one person walked out, before the next guy came in, he started saying to him and crying, pouring out his soul to Hashem. All the Hasidim started to worry. Is it everything okay with the Rebbe? After a little while, the Rebbe explained that when a person comes into me for yichidut, for a private audience, and he asks me for advice on a specific spiritual subject, first of all, I try to find how this concept can be by me. I don't like just to preach to people what to do and what not to do. First, I try to find how this idea is within me, at least on a very refined level, if not on a literal level. And then I'm able to sort of put myself in his shoes and then give him a remedy, a spiritual remedy. But today, someone came in for Yechidut. And he asked me for advice on such a low spiritual level. He did something so wrong that I can't believe that I actually have something like that within me. In other words, how can I even try to help the person? So I have to, that's why I was crying so much. In other words, I try to find the good in every single person. And in order to give him advice, I need to also judge him favorably. But I almost can't find almost any way how to judge him favorably because it's such a low level, I can't put myself in his shoes. And so obviously this is an extreme example because it's a Rebbe talking. But for us, in order for us to really bring ourselves to love every Jew, respect every Jew, and give another person the right place on the ladder, then we have to judge them favorably. That perhaps their lot in life and what they're going through, no one should know and no one can judge. So in summary, we started learning chapter 30, Perek Lamed, and we learned about how it's important to how we view ourselves in relation to others on the ladder. And based on that, we can see how humble we are or how humble we need to be. And most importantly, how we view someone else, and the other person should really be higher than us on the ladder. Thank you so much for joining us. Ezrat Hashem, we should learn together tomorrow morning, 9:30, Tehillim, according to Chassidus, looking forward. All the best, and shalom, shalom.